There comes a moment in every life when you realize just how fragile your world truly is. And for me, that moment came when my own flesh and blood, the ones I trusted the most, started plotting against me. They thought I was old, forgetful, no longer capable of standing up for myself. But they were wrong. This is my story of betrayal, manipulation, and the quiet revenge that restored my dignity. It was a slow kind of loneliness that crept into my life after Robert passed away. 7 years now, and I still can't quite get used to the silence. The house in Portland, Oregon, once filled with laughter and the clink of dishes, felt too big for just one person. The walls have memories, but sometimes those memories feel like they're slipping away. My daughter, Emily, has always been my pride. She was the apple of my eye, the child I raised with so much love. But over time, I started noticing a shift. She would come over less often, and when she did, it was always about what I needed to do. She would say things like, "Mom, you're not getting any younger," or "You've got to start thinking about your future." I didn't mind at first. She was just concerned, I thought. After all, I was 62, and though I didn't feel ancient, I wasn't as spry as I used to be. But then, it started to feel more like pressure than concern. Emily wasn't just offering advice, she was making decisions. Small ones at first, like suggesting I cut back on driving or that I shouldn't go out to dinner alone anymore. And then, Brian came into the picture, my new son-in-law, the picture of charm and kindness. He seemed to care for Emily, but there was something unsettling about the way he'd look at me. It was almost as if he saw me as something to manage, something to take care of. But I dismissed it. He was young, sweet, and trying to be a good husband. He was just doing what Emily asked of him, right? But then one day, Brian made an odd suggestion. He asked me for my bank passwords. "Just in case something happens," he said. "You know, in case you're not able to take care of things." I hesitated. He was looking at me with those wide, innocent eyes, and Emily was standing beside him, nodding like it was the most sensible thing in the world. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to seem difficult. So, reluctantly, I agreed. It wasn't a big deal, I told myself. I was just being practical. If something happened to me, it would make life easier for Emily. That was all. Nothing to worry about. But the moment I gave them those passwords, something changed. The tension in the house began to thicken, like a storm was brewing, and I was too blind to see the clouds. At first, it was little things. Brian would help me set up a new computer, but then I'd notice him fiddling with my settings in ways I hadn't asked for. Emily started making more decisions about my finances, my health care, even my social life. Every time I suggested something, it was dismissed as if I were no longer capable of making a sound judgment. I felt my world shrinking. It wasn't just the house that felt smaller now, but my entire existence. I had no say in what was happening around me. They'd taken control, and I was too tired, too beaten down to fight it. So I let it happen. I thought, maybe I was getting old. Maybe I wasn't seeing things clearly. But that was before I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. I'd just finished making myself a cup of tea when I heard them. Emily and Brian talking quietly in the next room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the house. The words I heard froze me in my tracks. "We'll sell the house," Brian said. "She won't need it when she's in a place, and we can take care of things." Emily responded, "Yeah, it's better that way. No point in keeping her here alone." The air in the room felt like it turned to ice. My heart began to race. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were talking about putting me in a place, like I was some sort of burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. They were planning to sell my home, my life, as if it were just another piece of property to liquidate. My hands shook as I placed my cup down on the counter. They weren't even trying to hide it. They weren't concerned for me. They were planning my end. It wasn't just about money, I realized. It was about control. They were going to erase me. I stood there for a long time, my mind spinning. I felt sick, betrayed, and yet something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let them do this to me. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way to take back what was mine. I wasn't just going to stand by and let them push me out of my own life. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something I'd forgotten, anger, and maybe it was long overdue, but I needed to be smart about it. I couldn't let them see what I was thinking. No, I had to play this carefully. And so I began to observe them more closely, taking note of every little thing. Every word, Every action. I would gather evidence, build my strategy. They wouldn't know what hit them. I wasn't going to let them take my dignity. I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. Not now, not ever. And if they thought I was too old to fight back, well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The days after I overheard Emily and Brian's conversation felt like a strange dream, one where everything I knew about my life was suddenly uncertain. I could no longer look at them the same way. The affection I had once felt for them now felt like a mask, and I could see right through it. Emily, my own daughter, was complicit in this plan. Brian, her husband, had been the driving force. I spent the next few days pretending that nothing had changed. I smiled, I nodded, I kept up appearances. But inside, I was seething. I had to be patient. They hadn't figured me out yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, to think this through before making any rash moves. It was during this time that I began to notice how much they'd already taken from me. I found myself relying more and more on their help for simple things, setting up appointments, managing bills, even answering calls. Emily was always there, taking over, saying, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle it." I'd let her. Of course, after all, she was my daughter, and I loved her. But now, I realized how easily they were wrapping me in their web. One evening, when Emily came over to check in on me, I noticed how she glanced at my old family pictures on the wall. The faces of our family seemed so distant now. She didn't even acknowledge the memories we had created together. It was as if I no longer mattered. Brian, too, started showing up more often. He'd help me with the little tasks around the house, installing a new security system, checking the plumbing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his kindness wasn't as innocent as it appeared. He was in control of everything. Emily might be the one I loved, but Brian was the one who held the power now. I was careful, so careful not to let them know that I was watching. They wouldn't get away with it, not on my watch. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I overheard another conversation between them. They didn't see me standing just beyond the door, listening. This time, they were discussing the next step. "We need to get her to trust us completely," Brian was saying, his voice smooth, like he was negotiating a business deal. "Once we have her trust, we can start transferring the accounts. It'll be easier that way." Emily responded, "She'll never agree to it if we push too hard. We need to do it slowly, make her think it's her idea. She's already agreed to the bank passwords. It's just a matter of time before we can take everything else." It was like a punch to the gut. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They were planning to take everything, my savings, my possessions, my future, by making me believe it was all for my own good. It made me sick to my stomach. I felt the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, but I couldn't let it show. I couldn't let them know that I knew what they were doing. They'd be more cautious, more manipulative. I had to stay one step ahead. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit back and let them steal my life away. But I needed to be clever. I had to play the game by their rules, just long enough to turn the tables on them. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to fight them outright, at least not yet. I needed to feign weakness, to make them think they had already won. If they thought I was too far gone, if they thought I was a helpless old woman, they would underestimate me, and that would be their mistake. I began to act the part. I forgot things on purpose, misremembered conversations, and fumbled with simple tasks. At first, Emily was relieved. She started to take over even more, speaking for me during phone calls, handling my appointments, and even telling me what I should be doing each day. "Don't worry, Mom. I've got this," she would say. But I could see the control in her eyes, the way she spoke to me as if I were a child. Brian, too, seemed pleased with the new arrangement. He would drop by unannounced, as if it were to check on me. But I knew better. He was making sure I stayed where they wanted me, in the confines of their plan. It was a slow descent, but I let it happen. I let them believe they were getting exactly what they wanted. But inside, I was preparing. I wasn't as helpless as they thought. I was still Margaret Brooks, the woman who had raised a daughter, who had run her own business, who had survived the greatest loss of her life. They hadn't broken me yet. The next time Brian came over to help, I handed him my old bank statements and asked him to look over them for me. I made sure to be extra forgetful about a few things, so he could feel like the responsible one. He didn't hesitate to dig into my personal finances. Little did he know, I was keeping track of everything. And I wasn't the one losing control. They were. I had to stay calm, stay patient, but now I knew what needed to be done. My next move was simple. I would take back my life, one step at a time, and I would make them pay. The days that followed my decision to pretend to be weaker than I was were some of the hardest I've ever endured. Every morning I woke up and reminded myself to play my part, to forget things, to shuffle around the house looking lost, to let Emily and Brian think they had me where they wanted me. The hardest part wasn't the acting. It was the feeling of betrayal that weighed on me, thick and suffocating. I watched as Emily took over, making decisions for me as though I were no longer capable of making my own choices. She began bringing up care facilities in casual conversation, as if it were the next logical step in our lives. The casual way she discussed my future, my fate, was like a slap in the face. I'm just thinking about what's best for you. Mom, she would say, as if it were all in my best interest. You'll be so much safer in a place where they can monitor you. Brian, too, was increasingly present. Every time I turned around, there he was, helping me with things I didn't ask for. He installed cameras in the living room, claiming it was for security, but I knew better. He wasn't securing my house. He was securing control over me. They were watching me, making sure I didn't stray from the path they had laid out. But I stayed silent, watched it all unfold, and felt my rage build quietly inside me. They thought I was just an old woman, slipping away into oblivion, too weak to fight for what was mine. They were wrong. The moment that changed everything came one evening, just a few days later. I had just finished dinner and was sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. It had always been a source of comfort for me, to remember the days when the house had been filled with the sound of Robert's laughter, the joy of our family dinners. But now, it only served to remind me of everything I had to lose. Emily and Brian were in the kitchen, and I overheard them talking again. This time, the words were sharper, more focused, and I could feel the tension rise in the air. "We can't wait much longer," Brian said, his voice low but urgent. "Once we get everything transferred into our names, it'll be much harder for her to contest anything." Emily responded, a hint of guilt in her voice. "I don't like it, but we don't have a choice. She's not getting any younger, and if she really is losing her mind—" "She's not losing her mind," Brian interrupted. "She's just old. We have to do this now. The longer we wait, the more complicated it'll get. And you know how she is. She won't let us help if she realizes what's going on." That was when it hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't just going along with it. She was fully complicit, fully invested in the plan. She was as much a part of the manipulation as Brian was. They were planning to take everything. But more than that, they were planning to erase me from my own life, to make me disappear, to take the things I had worked my whole life for, all under the guise of helping me. I gripped the edge of the coffee table, the anger coursing through me like electricity. They weren't just after my belongings. They were after my dignity, my sense of self. They were trying to make me feel worthless, insignificant. I had to stop them. I stood up quietly, making my way back to the kitchen where they were still talking. They hadn't noticed me yet, so I kept my footsteps light, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to keep them thinking I was just a feeble old woman. The less they knew about my plans, the better. I decided I needed to act fast. I couldn't afford to let them continue pushing me into a corner, but I had to do it carefully. They thought I was easy to manipulate. They thought I was weak. That was their mistake. I couldn't confront them yet. I had to make them believe I was still the same Maggie they could walk all over. I had to make them think they had all the time in the world to carry out their plan. But in reality, I had a ticking clock of my own, one that I was going to turn against them. I'd heard enough. I needed to take control, and I knew exactly how to do it. Over the next few days, I began to put my plan into motion, quietly, discreetly. I couldn't afford to slip up now. I called my old lawyer, the one who had helped Robert and me through some of our toughest times. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get started. He agreed to meet me the next week to go over my will and make sure everything was in order. If I was going to take back control of my life, I needed to have all my ducks in a row. Meanwhile, I started paying closer attention to Brian's behavior. He was so busy making sure I was dependent on him, taking over my life piece by piece, that he didn't notice how I was slowly slipping away from his grasp. Every time he thought he was helping me, I was watching, learning, and gathering everything I needed. I also made sure to withdraw small sums of money from my bank account. Nothing large enough to raise suspicion, but enough to give me a safety net. I would need it. The more I watched them, the more disgusted I became. But I stayed patient. I would not let my rage blind me to the real goal here. I was going to take back what was mine. I would expose their lies, their manipulation, and in the end, they would be the ones who would be left with nothing. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself and to them that I was not the frail, forgetful woman they thought I was. I was still capable. I was still Margaret Brooks, and I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine. And when I finally made my move, it would be their turn to feel the sting of betrayal. The following week, as I sat in my living room pretending to enjoy a quiet afternoon, I couldn't help but notice how much their presence had begun to suffocate me. Emily was at the house nearly every day now, as if she was afraid I might suddenly disappear. Brian was always there too, lingering in the background, lurking like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had become their project, their task to complete, and the realization cut deeper than I had anticipated. But this wasn't about me being their burden. This was about them being so blinded by greed that they didn't even consider that I might still have a trick or two left up my sleeve. They thought I was feeble, too tired to think clearly. And as I sat on my couch, letting them watch over me like hawks, I began to feel the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. I'd been cautious, careful not to give anything away. But now, I knew exactly what I had to do. Every piece of this game was falling into place, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. I had made an appointment with my lawyer, Paul, who had worked with Robert and me for years. He knew me, knew our family history. I trusted him. And more importantly, I knew I could count on him when it mattered. But I didn't trust Emily or Brian enough to let them in on my plans just yet. They had to think they were still in control. For now, my act was working perfectly. Emily came by as usual, and her eyes darted around the house, scanning every detail. I could feel her watching me, almost like she was trying to catch me in some mistake. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice too sweet, like she was making sure I didn't slip up. "I'm fine, darling," I replied, playing the part perfectly. "Just a little tired, that's all. Maybe you should take it easy. You know, take naps, let Brian handle things." She was trying to take charge again. It was subtle, but it was there. She was testing me, but I wouldn't let her see it. I smiled and nodded, letting her believe I was still the same old Maggie. She didn't know it yet, but I was already a few steps ahead of her. That afternoon, I received a phone call from Paul. He was ready to meet. "I've got the documents you requested, Maggie," he said. "Everything's set up. We can go over them whenever you're ready." I wasn't ready to go public yet, but I needed to know that I had everything in place. If this was going to work, I needed to make sure I had the upper hand when the time came. The first thing on my list was to review my will. I had to make sure I wasn't leaving them any loopholes. The next day, I met Paul at his office. He looked just as I remembered, his white hair a little grayer, his face more lined, but still the sharp, kind man I'd trusted for so many years. "You've been thinking about this, haven't you?" he asked, settling into his chair as I walked into the room. "I have," I replied, my voice steady, "and I need you to help me make sure they can't take anything from me. I want everything in order, no mistakes." Paul smiled softly, as if he understood exactly what I meant. He had always been able to read me like a book. "I've already made a few changes to your will. Just some minor adjustments to ensure there are no questions when it's time to execute it," he said, pulling out a few papers from a folder. "I'll need your signatures, of course." We spent the next hour going over the documents, making sure every detail was perfect. The last thing I wanted was for Emily and Brian to find a way to manipulate the situation, to twist my intentions. I knew they were already planning their next move, and I couldn't let them be one step ahead of me. Once I was satisfied, I signed everything. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more thing I needed. I needed to know exactly what Brian was up to with my finances. I couldn't let him just walk in and take everything without a fight. When I got home, I told Emily I wasn't feeling well and needed some rest. She fussed over me for a few minutes, but then she left, not even asking if I wanted company. She was too focused on the bigger picture, the picture in which I no longer mattered. Brian, however, was more persistent. He came by later that evening as usual, trying to check up on me. I let him in, pretending to be as weak and forgetful as ever. He took my hands in his, looking at me with that same concerned expression he always wore. "How are you feeling, Maggie? You know, I can take care of everything for you. You don't have to worry about a thing." I nearly choked on my own anger. He thought he had me. He thought I was the helpless, frail old woman he could manipulate into handing over everything he wanted. He had no idea what was coming. "I'm doing okay, Brian," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "But I've been thinking. I think it's time to move some of my assets around, just to be safe. You know, in case something happens. I'd like you to help me with that." His eyes lit up with that greedy glint I had come to recognize. "Of course, Maggie," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "I can handle that. You don't have to worry." I smiled softly to myself. It was time to let him think he was getting exactly what he wanted. It was time to reel him in. "You'll need to show me all the paperwork, Brian," I continued, playing the part. "I want to make sure everything's in order. I trust you to handle this, but I want to see it with my own eyes." He hesitated, just for a second, but then he agreed. "I'll get everything together," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "We can go over it tomorrow." As he left that evening, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were playing me, but I was the one who had been playing them all along. I was going to take back what was mine, and when the moment came, they would regret ever underestimating me. The days following Brian's visit felt like a strange mix of anticipation and quiet dread. The more I played the part of the confused, forgetful old woman, the more I began to realize just how deeply I had buried myself in this game. Every time I looked at Brian or Emily, it was like I was wearing a mask I couldn't take off. But I had to keep playing along. I had to keep them thinking I was weak, too confused to figure out their scheme. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I almost broke, when the anger I felt for both of them bubbled up so violently that I had to bite my tongue to keep from lashing out. But I knew better. Patience was my ally now. The following day, Brian came over, as promised. He was carrying a stack of papers, his face all business, looking as though he were the one in charge. The papers, contracts, financial statements, various forms I had long since stopped reading, were laid out neatly in front of me. As I sat there playing the part, I couldn't help but notice how confident he was, as if he had already won. He kept glancing at me, as though gauging my reaction, waiting for me to sign on the dotted line, as if it were all a foregone conclusion. "So, Maggie," Brian began, his tone overly calm, "I've gone over everything, and it looks like the easiest way to take care of things is to consolidate your accounts. I can handle the transfer, and we'll make sure everything's under control." I nodded slowly, taking in the words, but not letting them take root in my mind. I needed to buy more time. "Yes, I agree," I said, my voice faint, unsure, playing the part so well it almost felt real. It's all so much to keep track of. I've never been very good with this stuff." Brian smiled, a smile that I knew all too well. It was the smile of someone who thought they had you cornered, someone who thought you were already defeated. "You don't have to worry about anything, Maggie. I'll make sure everything's taken care of." He paused and looked at me with that disingenuous softness. "We're just trying to help you. It's what any good family would do." That statement cut through me like a knife. A good family? I wanted to laugh at how easy it was for him to play the part, and how easy it was for Emily to go along with it all, like she didn't even see the depths of his manipulation. But I kept my cool. I had to. They needed to think I was clueless. "I trust you, Brian," I said, and the words felt like they were physically choking me. But I smiled and handed him the pen. "You know best." I watched him carefully, my eyes narrow but calm. His fingers trembled for a moment as he reached for the pen, and I caught the glint of something in his eyes, excitement, maybe even greed. He was so eager to get this over with, to tie up loose ends. As he signed the first document, my mind was racing. I had already anticipated this move, already put the pieces in place. The only thing I needed now was the final confirmation, the final step that would make everything clear, proof of Brian's manipulation. I had made sure to record everything. I had kept every document, every scrap of evidence, without their knowledge. It wasn't just the papers they brought to me. I had my own copies of my financial records, my bank statements, and my will, documents I'd set up to protect myself, documents they'd never seen. It was time to put the final phase of my plan into action. As Brian shuffled through the papers, I casually reached over and picked up my phone. "Oh," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "Could you give me a moment?" "Brian? I just need to check something quickly." He barely looked up from the papers. "Sure, go ahead." I quickly unlocked my phone, and sent a message to Paul, my lawyer, just as I had planned. Everything's set. Bring the final papers tomorrow. I set the phone back down, carefully covering my tracks. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. A safety net. Brian had finished signing most of the documents and looked up at me with that same smug look on his face. All done, he said. We're in a good place now, Maggie. Everything's under control. But it wasn't under control. Not by a long shot. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't about to let them take everything from me, not without a fight. Thank you, Brian, I said quietly. You've been so helpful. I stood up slowly, acting weak, frail, the perfect picture of helplessness. I'm just so tired now. I think I'll lie down for a while. He smiled again, that same patronizing smile, and nodded. Of course, Maggie. You take it easy. We'll finish everything up when you're feeling better. I watched him leave the house, my heart racing, my mind already calculating my next move. The documents were signed, but not finalized yet. Not until I had the final pieces in place. I knew what I had to do now. The moment I could get Paul to finalize everything, the truth would come crashing down on them. The only thing left now was to take back what was mine, to show them that they had underestimated me, that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, about proving that I was still in control of my own life, my own fate. And when the truth came out, Emily and Brian would be the ones who were left scrambling. I wasn't going down without a fight. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy and tension. On the surface, everything looked the same. Emily came by, Brian checked in, and I continued to play my part as the frail, forgetful mother. I let them believe they had me completely under their control. They thought they were in charge, that I was too weak and confused to resist. But they were so wrong. The longer I stayed quiet, the more I observed. The more they showed me who they really were. The day after Brian signed the papers, I felt like I was on the brink of something. I could see it in their eyes, in Emily's slightly hurried movements, in Brian's increasing confidence. They thought they had already won. But I was about to turn the tables, slowly and methodically, in a way they wouldn't expect. I had already contacted Paul, my lawyer, and we had arranged a meeting for the following week. He was ready to finalize everything on my end, the legal paperwork that would ensure I wasn't left vulnerable. In the meantime, I needed to make sure that Emily and Brian didn't catch wind of what was happening. I couldn't let them know that I was preparing to strike back. As the days wore on, I noticed small things, slips of the tongue, tiny missteps they didn't even realize they were making. Emily, for example, started mentioning the care facility more frequently, as if it were already a done deal. She would casually throw it into conversations, as if it were the next step in my life, like a natural progression. "Mom, I really think you'd be happier in a place where people can take care of you," she'd say, as though I had no say in the matter. It didn't help that Brian would occasionally visit, offering more help, his words always coded in that sickly sweet tone of someone pretending to be doing you a favor. He was pushing me, trying to get me to sign off on everything so they could take full control. I could see it in the way he studied my every move, watching for any sign of resistance, any indication that I was catching on. But they couldn't see the storm brewing beneath the surface. I wasn't as fragile as they thought. I wasn't as forgetful as they imagined. I kept up the act. Each day, I would pretend to forget little things. I'd misplace my keys or mix up appointments. Sometimes, I'd even go as far as to ask them to repeat something I had just heard. Emily and Brian thought it was working. They thought I was slipping. And that, of course, made them more confident. They thought they had already broken me, that I was just waiting for them to take over. But in reality, I was waiting for the right moment to act. That moment came on a Thursday afternoon. I had been pretending to nap on the couch when I heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. It was Brian. He was here, as usual, to check on me, or so he said. I wasn't in the mood to deal with his sweet talk, but I had to keep up the facade. He had made it clear that he was just looking out for me, but we both knew that wasn't the truth. The truth was that he wanted to control everything in my life. I slowly got up from the couch, pretending to be stiff, slow, unsteady. When I opened the door, he was standing there with that familiar smile, holding a manila folder, more paperwork, more things I couldn't understand on my own. "I brought you some more things to sign, Maggie," he said, his voice a little too cheerful, a little too rehearsed. "Just some final details to wrap up everything. It's all for your own good, you know." I nodded, playing the part. "I'm sure it is, Brian. Just leave them on the table and I'll get to it soon, I said, trying to sound weak, as if I couldn't even muster the energy to look at the papers myself. He hesitated for a moment, but then placed the folder on the table and patted me on the arm. "Take your time, Maggie," he said, with that same saccharine smile. "Let me know if you need anything. You know I'm here for you." I closed the door behind him, my heart hammering in my chest. I had a plan, but it needed to be executed with care. I couldn't rush it. I slowly walked over to the table, where the manila folder sat untouched. The time had come. I opened the folder carefully, but not so carefully that it would seem suspicious. Inside were the final documents, the ones Brian had been pushing me to sign for weeks. There were forms about my assets, my bank accounts, everything he and Emily would need to take control once the final signatures were on paper. I smiled to myself, a grim, knowing smile. The papers, while they seemed official, were not as powerful as they appeared. In fact, they were nothing more than a formality, a legal trap they thought they had set for me. I had already anticipated this. I had already prepared. Hidden inside the folder, wedged between the documents, was a copy of my most recent will and testament, the one I had quietly updated with Paul's help. This will wasn't what Emily or Brian thought it was. They had no idea that I had made sure to protect myself. My house, my accounts, my savings, all of it had been legally transferred to my name, and there was one last piece of the puzzle I needed to put in place. I knew it was time to play my final card. I could feel the pieces clicking into place. One by one, I picked up my phone and made the call. "Paul, it's Maggie. I'm ready." The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. "I'll be there tomorrow, Maggie. We'll finalize everything. You're in the clear." I hung up the phone and sat back down in my chair, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but I was finally in control. I had the upper hand now. Emily and Brian had no idea what was coming. They had pushed me too far, underestimated me, and now they would have to face the consequences. Tomorrow, the final piece would fall into place. The days leading up to the final meeting with Paul were some of the longest I've ever endured. But in a way, they were also the most peaceful. I had spent so many years of my life caring for others, making sure everyone around me was taken care of, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to think for myself, to make decisions that didn't have to be justified to anyone. Now, I was finally in control again. Emily and Brian had no idea what was coming. They thought they had already won, but the truth was, they were walking straight into my trap. Each time they came by, I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Emily would check in with her usual concern, all surface-level sweetness, while Brian would ask if I needed anything at all, while keeping an eye on every movement I made. But the more they tried to manage me, the more I realized just how badly they had underestimated me. They thought I was just some frail woman slipping into dementia, that I wouldn't know what was happening until it was too late. They were wrong. I spent those days preparing, setting up the final details. I had gone over everything with Paul, the lawyer, carefully. There were no loose ends now. Every document was in place. My will, my accounts, everything I had worked for in my life, my home, my money, my future, was legally protected. Emily and Brian couldn't touch any of it without facing legal repercussions, and they had no idea how close they were to their own downfall. I had to be patient just a little longer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house seemed amplified in the silence. My mind was racing. I kept thinking back to all the times I had trusted them. All the years I had raised Emily, cared for her, loved her. How did it all go so wrong? How did the people I had loved and cared for come to see me as nothing more than a financial opportunity? But no more. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to just sit by and let them strip me of my dignity. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning finally came, and I felt oddly calm. It was the first time in a long time that I felt truly at peace. I dressed carefully, not too fast, and made sure I was prepared. I had one final step to take before the plan would be set in motion. When I arrived at Paul's office, he greeted me with his usual warm smile. He had been a part of my life for so long that I felt comfortable in his presence. But today, there was no time for pleasantries. I needed to make sure that everything was solid, that there were no mistakes. "I've made all the necessary changes," Paul said, as we sat down in his office, flipping through the paperwork. "We're ready to proceed. Your will is updated, your assets are secured, and everything is in order. If they try to challenge anything now, they won't stand a chance. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. This was it. I was ready. As we went through the final steps of the paperwork, I couldn't help but think about what this meant. This wasn't just about money or a house or anything material. This was about taking my life back. It was about reclaiming my voice, my autonomy. Emily and Brian had thought they could push me aside, treat me like I was no longer relevant, but I was going to show them that I was far from done. By the time we were finished, the legal documents were in place. Paul handed me a final copy of everything. "You're all set," he said with a reassuring smile. "Now it's just a matter of time." I stood up, feeling a newfound strength in my steps. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like a victory already. The battle was almost won. When I got home, I took a deep breath before walking through the front door. The house, my home, seemed quieter today. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the years of memories, the love that had filled these walls, now tainted by the betrayal of the people I had trusted most. I needed to confront them. I couldn't let them think they had gotten away with it. That evening, Emily came by as usual. She knocked softly on the door, and I opened it, putting on the most serene expression I could manage. She didn't even seem to notice the subtle change in me. She came in with her usual rush of words. How was I feeling? Had I taken my medicine? What did I think about the care facility she'd been looking at? I listened to her, nodding as I always did. But something inside me was different. The act I had been playing was slipping away. I wasn't the old, forgetful woman they thought I was. I was Margaret Brooks, and I was about to take back what was mine. "I've been thinking, Mom," Emily said, her voice too sweet, "and I really think it's time for you to make a decision about your future. You don't want to end up in a situation where we have to make the choice for you." She was pushing again, her words veiled in false concern, but I could see right through her. I had known for a while now that she wasn't looking out for me. She was looking out for herself. "I've made my decision, Emily," I said, my voice calm, even, but carrying a weight of finality she hadn't expected. "I'm not going anywhere." Emily blinked, clearly thrown off. "What do you mean?" I smiled softly. "I mean, I've already taken care of everything. My future is secure, and so is my home. It's all in place." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw fear flicker across her face. She was realizing it too late. She had miscalculated, and now the consequences were about to catch up with her. "Mom," she said, a slight edge to her voice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've already secured my assets. Everything is in order. You and Brian won't be taking control of my life. Not now, not ever." Emily's expression shifted, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the panic starting to set in. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for me to take back control, but I had already made sure that nothing she or Brian did could touch what was rightfully mine. The silence in the room felt heavy as I stood there, watching her. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let them push me around. I had taken control of my life, and I would not let them take it from me again. "Get out, Emily," I said quietly, my voice sharp, steady. "You and Brian don't belong here anymore." Her face turned pale, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but she didn't. She simply turned on her heel and walked out of the house, her footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. I took a deep breath and closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place, a reminder of how far I had come. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about my redemption. It was about standing up for myself when no one else would. And I had won. The days following Emily's departure were strangely quiet. The house, once so full of tension, felt almost peaceful. There was no more pretending, no more watching my every move. I was free. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't just about feeling free. It was about making sure Emily and Brian knew that they couldn't walk all over me anymore. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a statement. I wasn't some helpless old woman who could be manipulated. I was still in control of my life. I spent the next few days taking stock of everything. My lawyer, Paul, had made sure my assets were protected, but I wanted to be thorough. I went through every file, every document, and double-checked everything, making sure there were no loopholes, no cracks they could slip through. It was exhausting, but it was worth it. This wasn't just about reclaiming my property. It was about making sure Emily and Brian never had the chance to destroy my life again. But I couldn't ignore the hollow feeling inside me. As much as I had gained, there was still something missing. A part of me felt lost, like a piece of my heart had been chipped away by all the betrayal. I had spent years caring for Emily, loving her, believing that she would never turn on me. And Brian, he wasn't even family, but he had wormed his way into my life so easily. His kindness an act that masked his true intentions. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the fight for my house. It was the realization that my own daughter had been willing to sacrifice me for her own gain. That more than anything, hurt the most. The phone call came on a Sunday afternoon, a week after Emily had left. I wasn't expecting it, but when I saw her name on the caller ID, I felt a strange mix of anger and curiosity. I debated for a moment, but I knew I had to answer. "Hello, Mom," Emily said, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you." I felt a flicker of something, perhaps sympathy, perhaps just weariness, but I held my ground. "What do you want, Emily?" There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, I could hear the vulnerability in her voice. "I know I've hurt you, and I know I've made mistakes. I don't know how things got so out of hand, but I'm sorry." I could hear the crack in her voice, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Was she really sorry? Or was this just another attempt to regain control, to worm her way back into my life? "You should have thought about that before you and Brian decided to take everything from me," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I gave you everything, Emily, and you tried to take what wasn't yours. You have no idea how much that hurts." "I was just trying to do what I thought was best for you," she said, but I could hear the cracks in her words, the desperation. I thought it was the only way to protect you, but I see now that I was wrong." I could have let her continue, but something inside me told me to stop her before she twisted the truth any further. "You weren't protecting me, Emily. You were protecting yourself. You and Brian were planning my future for me, but you never thought to ask me what I wanted." "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "and I'm sorry. I just didn't know what else to do. I thought I was losing you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reach out, to hold her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed, told me to stay firm, to not let her off so easily." "Do you know what you've done, Emily?" I said, my voice cold. "You tried to push me out of my own life, and for what? Because you were scared? Because you wanted more? I can't just forget that. Not now." "I understand," she whispered. I'll never forgive myself, but I want to make things right. I want to fix this." I took a long breath, weighing my options. I could let her back into my life, but it would never be the same. Could I ever trust her again? Did I even want to? "I don't know if we can fix this, Emily," I said finally. "But I'm not ready to let you back in just yet. You've done too much damage, and I need time to figure out where we go from here." "I understand," she said softly, and there was a long silence. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I hope one day we can start over." I didn't answer right away. I needed time. I needed space to think, to process everything. So much had happened, and my emotions were still raw. I had to be careful not to let my anger and hurt make decisions for me. "I'll think about it," I finally said, before ending the call. I sat there for a while, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. I had never imagined that things would end like this, that my own daughter would become a stranger in my life. But I also knew that this was the reality now. She had crossed a line, and no matter how much I loved her, no matter how much I wanted to forgive her, I couldn't just erase what she had done. The next morning, I went through the motions of daily life, making coffee, checking the mail, reading a book, but there was a weight that still hung over me, a weight that wasn't going to disappear, no matter how much I wanted it to. I had won the legal battle, yes. I had regained control over my home and my future. But the emotional scars, the betrayal from the ones I loved, would take much longer to heal. Emily and Brian had thought they could break me. They had thought they could take everything from me without consequence. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. But the road to forgiveness, if I ever found it, was going to be a long one. The days passed slowly after my conversation with Emily. The guilt I had felt at first, the one that tried to convince me to forgive her, slowly faded as I realized that I had to protect myself first. I had spent so many years giving, so many years sacrificing my needs for others, that I had lost myself in the process. Emily and Brian had taken advantage of that, thinking I was an easy target, someone they could control, someone they could manipulate for their gain. I couldn't let that happen again, no matter how much I loved her. I spent the next few days focused on myself, something I hadn't done in so long. I began organizing the house, sorting through the things that had once been so important to me, but now felt like burdens I needed to release. I cleaned out drawers, went through old family photos, and took stock of everything that mattered. The past felt heavier with every step I took through the house, but I knew I couldn't hold on to it forever. Letting go of the past was the only way I was going to heal. Emily's absence was palpable. There was a coldness in the air, a void where her presence used to be. It was strange. For so long, she had been the center of my world, and now there was nothing but silence. I kept telling myself that I had done the right thing, that she needed to learn a lesson, that I needed to stand up for myself. But deep down, I wasn't sure. I had never wanted this. I had never wanted to push her away, but she had given me no choice. She had crossed a line, and I had to make sure I didn't allow her to cross it again. The phone rang on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I didn't recognize the number, but I hesitated before picking up the receiver. "Maggie," the voice on the other end said. "It's Paul." I felt a brief wave of anxiety in my chest. I had been so focused on my own healing, on putting everything in order, that I hadn't thought much about the legal matters in the past few days. "Hi, Paul," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" "I've been looking over some of the documents," he said. "I just wanted to double-check something with you. There's a bit of a complication." "A complication?" My stomach sank. "Complication?" I repeated, my heart starting to race. "What do you mean?" "There's been some movement with the accounts," Paul continued, his voice calm, but I could tell he was holding something back. "It seems Brian, he's made some changes to the joint accounts. There's been a large withdrawal." My head spun as his words sank in. Brian? I thought I had secured everything. How had he managed to access the accounts? "I'm sorry, Maggie," Paul continued, "but I think you need to be aware of this. We're going to have to take legal action." I felt the air in my lungs leave me. I had thought I had won. I thought I had outsmarted them. But it seemed like Emily and Brian weren't done yet. They weren't just trying to take my house. Now they were trying to take everything else I had. "Paul," I said, my voice trembling. "How much did he take?" There was a long pause before he responded. "A significant amount, Maggie. Enough to cause concern. I can't go into all the details just yet, but you need to act quickly. I'm filing a petition to freeze the accounts until we get to the bottom of this, but we need to move fast." The betrayal hit me harder this time. I had let my guard down, thinking the worst was behind me, but it wasn't. Brian had slipped through the cracks, and now I had to fight back once again. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice firm. "Just make sure they can't get away with this." "I'll be in touch soon," Paul said. "We'll take care of it." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. They had crossed the line once again, but this time, it wasn't just a financial game. They were coming for everything. They were trying to take my life from me once again, but I wasn't going to let them. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the phone, but eventually, the anger I had been holding in for so long began to surface. I had spent my entire life protecting others, making sure Emily had everything she needed, trying to keep peace in the family. But peace had never been on their agenda. They had used me, manipulated me, and now they thought they could take everything without consequences. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I made another call to Paul, determined to take action before Brian and Emily could do any more damage. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. This time, it wasn't just about the money. It was about protecting my life, my dignity, and my future. "I need you to make sure they can't touch anything," I said, my voice shaking with resolve. "If Brian's making moves on my accounts, I want everything frozen immediately. I'm already working on it." "Maggie," Paul reassured me, "we'll get this sorted." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency building inside me. Emily and Brian had underestimated me. They thought they could take my life without facing any consequences. But I wasn't the same person I used to be. I had learned the hard way that some people can't be trusted, that some people will do whatever it takes to take what's not theirs. I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. I had fought too hard to get to this point. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had built, and when the time came, I would make them pay for what they had done. The next few days felt like an emotional roller coaster. I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders as I worked with Paul to navigate this new wave of betrayal. Brian's attempt to take more from me wasn't just a financial blow. It was personal. It was as if he and Emily had decided, together, that I was nothing more than an obstacle, something to be erased. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I spent the entire week with Paul, going over every detail, every move Brian and Emily had made. We reviewed all the documents, confirmed the fraudulent withdrawals, and set up legal action to freeze the accounts, just as we had planned. The legal process was complicated, and I could feel the pressure mounting with every call, every meeting. It wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. It was about stopping them from ruining everything I had left. The stress was starting to take a toll. I hadn't slept properly in days, my mind constantly racing with thoughts of Emily and Brian, their betrayal, and what they had taken from me. But I refused to let it defeat me. I had come too far to give up now. I had spent far too many years thinking of others before myself, and it had all led to this moment. I wasn't going to let them strip me of my life and my dignity any longer. On the 5th day after Paul's call, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Brian. I stared at the envelope, unsure of what to expect. The handwriting was neat, almost too neat, and the familiar scent of his cologne lingered faintly on the paper. My stomach churned at the thought of what was inside. I tore open the envelope, my hands shaking slightly, and unfolded the letter. It was short, too short, but the words hit me harder than I expected. Maggie, I know things have gotten out of hand, and I want to make things right. I've made some mistakes, and I can't undo what's been done, but I'm asking for your forgiveness. Emily and I never meant for things to go this far. I didn't know what else to do. Please, let's fix this. Please. It was manipulative, I realized immediately. The apology felt hollow, like a last-ditch effort to regain control, a way for Brian to make it seem like he was the good guy, asking for forgiveness so he could keep his grip on me. Emily, no doubt, had asked him to send the letter. They were cornered now, and this was their way of trying to make things right without facing the consequences. But it wasn't going to work. I could see right through him. There would be no forgiveness, no second chances. The trust was gone, the damage done. I had learned the hard way that there were some people in your life who only brought harm, and Brian was one of them. I set the letter down on the table, taking a long breath as I stared at the words. They felt like a mockery. Emily and Brian had taken so much from me already, and now they wanted to fix everything with a few heartfelt words. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I picked up my phone and dialed Paul's number, my fingers trembling slightly. Maggie, Paul answered, his voice steady and professional. What's going on? I just got a letter from Brian, I said, my voice tight. It's a half-hearted apology, asking for forgiveness. I know it's just a last-ditch effort to get back into my life, but I wanted to let you know about it. I'm not buying it. Good, Paul said, his tone resolute. We'll move forward with everything we discussed. This letter won't change a thing. We'll make sure they can't get away with any more manipulation. I took a deep breath. The anger I had been holding inside, now bubbling to the surface. I wasn't just fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting for my peace of mind, my dignity, my sense of self. Brian and Emily had tried to take everything from me, but they had forgotten one important thing. I was still here. I was still standing. The next day, I went to the courthouse with Paul. The legal papers were in order, and the petition to freeze the accounts was filed. The wheels of justice had started to turn, and there was no turning back now. Brian and Emily were about to face the consequences of their actions, and I wasn't going to let them slip away without answering for what they had done. When we got back to my house, I took a long, hard look at everything. The rooms filled with memories, the possessions that had once meant so much to me. It was all just stuff. The real value, the real treasure, was in who I was now. I had fought back, I had taken control, and I had fought for myself in a way I had never done before. As the days passed, I began to feel the weight of the situation shift, the pressure, the fear, the constant worry. It all started to ease. I knew there was still a long way to go before everything was fully resolved, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had a future again, a future that was entirely mine. And then, one morning, the phone rang. It was Paul again, but this time, his voice was different, stronger, more confident. "We've got them, Maggie," he said. We've frozen the accounts, and I filed the petition to halt any further withdrawals. Brian and Emily are going to have to answer for what they've done. You've won this battle." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but there was no time to celebrate. I wasn't done yet. There was still work to do, still a fight to be fought, but for the first time, I knew I had won. They had tried to take everything from me, but they hadn't succeeded. And now they were going to face the consequences of their actions. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath, staring out the window at the quiet street outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. It wasn't just about the house, or the money, or the legal victory. It was about reclaiming my life, and that was something no one could take from me again. The relief I felt after hearing Paul's voice on the phone was undeniable, but it didn't last long. The momentary calm that settled over me quickly gave way to a new kind of tension, the kind that comes with waiting for a storm to break. Brian and Emily had underestimated me, but now that the legal battle was in motion, I knew they were going to fight back. They weren't the kind of people who just walked away. I spent the next few days in a daze, torn between relief and anticipation. The legal process had started, but the outcome was still uncertain. I had spent so long being manipulated by them that the idea of taking control, of actually winning, felt strange, foreign. It was as if I had to retrain myself to believe that I deserved peace, that I deserved to keep what was mine. The phone calls from Paul were frequent, each one updating me on the progress of the case. "They're stalling," he told me on the third day. "Brian and Emily have lawyered up, but they're running out of time. We're going to move forward with the hearings, and we've got the evidence we need to keep them from touching any of your assets." It was the reassurance I needed, but I could tell from Paul's voice that this wasn't going to be easy. The longer they delayed, the more I realized just how far Brian and Emily were willing to go to keep their hands on my life. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But what worried me more was Emily. I hadn't heard from her in days after the phone call we'd had. Part of me hoped that her silence meant she was finally beginning to understand the consequences of her actions. But the other part of me, the part that had loved her for so many years, feared that she was just biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I knew I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not even for a second. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through old letters and bills, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped in my chest. It was too late for anyone to be coming by, especially not Emily or Brian. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was just a neighbor or a delivery, but the urgency in my chest told me otherwise. I slowly made my way to the door and opened it. There, standing on the other side, was Emily. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman standing there wasn't the daughter I had raised, the woman who had once brought me so much pride. This was someone else, someone who had betrayed me. "Mom," she said, her voice strained and fragile, "I need to talk to you." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, the door held slightly ajar. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but the anger and hurt were simmering beneath the surface. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice cracking as she spoke. "But I need you to understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was scared. I thought I was protecting you." Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream at her, tell her how much she had hurt me, how much I had trusted her. But I bit my tongue, refusing to let the rage consume me. I had already fought so hard to get to this point. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me again. "You weren't protecting me, Emily," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You were protecting yourself. You and Brian were using me, trying to take everything I've worked for." She flinched at the words, her eyes welling up with tears. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought you'd be better off if I took care of everything. I thought if I controlled things, you wouldn't have to worry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she had been caught. She was sorry it hadn't gone the way she'd planned. But deep down, she still didn't fully understand the magnitude of her betrayal. "Emily, this isn't about you trying to control everything for me," I said. my voice firm now. "This is about trust. You betrayed me. You and Brian both tried to take everything from me, and for what? Because you were afraid of losing control? Because you wanted more than you already had?" She shook her head, the tears falling freely now. "I don't know what came over me," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought if I just took care of it all, you wouldn't have to worry. I thought I could save you." "I didn't need saving," I said quietly, the words leaving my mouth with a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. "I needed you to be honest. I needed you to trust me. I needed you to be my daughter, not someone who saw me as a liability." She stared at me, her face stricken with regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." I stood there, staring at her, feeling the tension in the air thick and heavy. Part of me wanted to take her in my arms and tell her that everything was going to be okay, that we could start over, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. "I need space, Emily," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "I can't just forget what you've done. You've crossed a line, and I don't know if I can ever trust you the same way again. You need to understand that." She nodded, the tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered, and then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door behind her, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me. Emily had come to apologize, but I wasn't sure it was enough. She had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. And while part of me still wanted to forgive her, another part knew that forgiveness was something that had to be earned, not given freely. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. There was still so much to process, so much to figure out. But one thing was clear. I wasn't done. The fight wasn't over. And no matter what happened next, I would be ready. The days after Emily left my doorstep were quieter than they had been in a long time. There was an eerie stillness that followed her departure, a feeling of finality that lingered in the air. I knew things could never go back to how they were before, but I also knew that I was finally in control. I had fought for my life back, piece by piece, and now, despite the emotional wreckage of the past weeks, I could feel a sense of relief settling in. But there was still one thing left to do. The court proceedings were underway, and every day I received updates from Paul. The legal process was slow, tedious, but it was working. Brian and Emily were scrambling, trying to fight back, trying to claim that they had only acted out of concern for me. But the truth was clear. They had tried to manipulate me, to take everything that was mine, and they wouldn't get away with it. Not if I had anything to say about it. I had spent so many years as the one who gave, who sacrificed, who tried to hold everything together. But that was before. Now I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the one being controlled. I had learned to take care of myself, to protect what was mine. And in doing so, I had learned something vital about who I was. I wasn't just Margaret Brooks, the woman who had raised her daughter with love and devotion. I was a woman who had survived. I was a woman who had fought back and who would continue to do so, no matter what it took. The day of the hearing came, and I arrived at the courthouse, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. I wore a simple dress, something comfortable, but I carried myself differently today. I wasn't just walking into that courtroom as a woman who had been betrayed. I was walking in as someone who had already won. Paul was waiting for me when I walked in, his expression serious but reassuring. "We've got this, Maggie," he said, guiding me into the courtroom. "You've done everything right. Just remember that." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly, but I didn't let the nerves take hold. This wasn't about nerves anymore. This was about justice. As the hearing began, I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me. I had been in that courtroom once before, many years ago, when Robert and I had made our wills, when we'd planned for the future. But today, it wasn't just about a piece of paper or a legal document. Today, it was about my entire life, the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the love. Brian and Emily were both present, sitting across from me, their eyes averted. Emily looked tired, her eyes swollen from days of crying, but there was still something about her that bothered me. The guilt she wore wasn't the guilt of someone who had truly learned their lesson. It was the guilt of someone who had been caught, someone who was now scrambling to salvage what little they had left. Brian, on the other hand, looked smug. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I could see it in the way he held himself, in the way he spoke to his lawyer, as if everything was still under his control. But I knew better now. I knew exactly what he was. The proceedings were long, and the tension in the room was thick, but I could tell that the tide was turning in my favor. Paul presented the evidence, the fraudulent withdrawals, the signed documents that Brian had tried to hide, and the audio recordings of the conversations where they had planned to take everything from me. It was all there, undeniable, and for the first time, I felt the power shift. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands steady at my sides. My voice didn't shake as I had expected. It was firm, clear, and unwavering. "Your Honor," I began, my eyes not leaving Emily and Brian. "I have spent my entire life taking care of others. I have loved, I have given, I have sacrificed. But I have learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who will hurt you the most, and I will not stand by while they take everything I have left." I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in, before continuing. "I am not asking for sympathy. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for justice, for my life back, for the truth to be heard." I could see Brian's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Emily looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She knew she had lost. The judge, a woman with a stern yet compassionate face, nodded slowly. "We have reviewed the evidence, and it is clear that your assets were taken unlawfully. Brian, Emily, you have both failed to prove that your actions were in any way justified. The court will rule in favor of Mrs. Brooks, and we will move forward with the necessary steps to restore her assets." I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't over yet, but the worst was behind me. Brian and Emily had lost. They had tried to manipulate me, to take everything from me, but they had failed. And now the consequences were theirs to face. When the hearing was adjourned, I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. Paul offered a reassuring smile, but I didn't need it. I had already won. We walked out of the courthouse, the sunlight blinding after the dark of the courtroom, but I didn't shield my eyes. I wanted to see everything clearly, to know that the storm was finally over. I went back to my home, the one that was mine again, and sat down in the living room. For the first time, it felt like home again. The house was empty, but I wasn't alone. I was free. The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was Emily. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me told me I needed to. "Mom," her voice cracked when I picked up. "I don't know where to begin." I took a deep breath, my voice calm but final. "There's nothing left to say, Emily." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know," I said, my heart heavy with the truth. "But sorry isn't enough." And with that, I hung up the phone. It wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me, reclaiming the life that had always been mine. I wasn't just surviving. I was living. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.